Oh,
So,
boy.
so moving on to our last and final topic, He-Man is getting a new show, and this is a sequel. That's important. It's a sequel, not a reboot. So it's actually it's kind of picking up where the old show from the early 80s ended. It's going to be, I think the showrunner is Kevin Smith.
Yes.
Kevin Smith. And Vash, I mean, what are your thoughts on this new He-Man? I mean, there were some new images released, and being a sequel, not a reboot. What are your overall thoughts, man?
He-Man, master of the universe. This guy.
By the power of Grayskull.
That guy?
That
guy. Okay. So yeah, this is kind of cool. Listen, we talked about Flintstones and we talked about the failures and stuff with that, and how we weren't super excited about who was leading that project. And you heard, the man, I forget her name, but the director of Pitch Perfect 2. You heard her talk about it, and she was just like, well, it kind of sounded like it was trying to like do Flintstones into something, like make it or change it in a way to make it something that she would watch herself. So that's why we kind of had those thoughts on it that we did. This sounds far more interesting. Kevin Smith apparently is a fan of it, and if you look at this cast, and I have the photo right here to bring it up here.
There you go.
This cast is, I'll try to make it bigger. This cast is huge. I mean, it's got talent from all over Hollywood, and it's really fascinating to see. It was up there. Okay, it's really fascinating to see who is on board with this. You got Mark Hamill, for instance. You got some of the Game of Thrones cast. You got people all over the industry joining into this kind of almost collaborative effort. This is a lot more fascinating to me than like the Flintstones, for example.
Absolutely, 1,000% more interesting. And here's the thing. here's something interesting about myself a little bit. I've always been a big Disney fan, but my obsession with Disney didn't really begin until maybe like the early 90s, when that whole Renaissance era started. When I was a very, very young child, I would say under 12, under 11, I was more into stuff like this. I was obsessed with He-Man, Transformers, even Care Bears. I liked My Little Pony, Thundercats, Silverhawks. Those were my jams. You know what I'm saying? And I was more into this stuff than I was Disney when I was a really young child. So He-Man hits to me directly, and it hits me in the feels, because it's totally nostalgic for my childhood, my very, very young youth. I'm excited. I love the direction he's going with this, where it being a sequel, not a reboot, which is, I think, important. I think that's pretty cool. And I think Kevin Smith, being a nerd himself, who is of this generation that would have grown up on He-Man, I think he's going to do well for the character and the franchise. I think he's going to respect it and do good by it. I really do. George, I know you're a 90s baby. This is a little after your time, but what do you feel about He-Man coming back, buddy?
This was definitely after my time, but I did watch the show, throughout the 90s, so I do have some appreciation for it. Based on what you're showing me, like with the cast, I mean, these aren't just secondhand people that you get from a Playhouse theater. I mean, like, these are seasoned professionals that they're literally combining. So I guess in my mind that they have this big anticipation that this is going to be a colossal hit. And I really think if it's done well, I think it can honestly start something up where, sort of how like with Marvel and DC and Star Wars, that He-Man could start, creating its own universe, and branch off into different things.
Yeah, absolutely. These kind of like reimagining or bringing these old franchises back, they either work or they don't. Hey, Transformers, as bad as some of those movies are, hey, they were successful. A lot of those movies made over $1 billion. They did a very good job at kind of bringing that franchise to the new age, the new generation. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work so well. this might catch fire. This might do very, very well. And I'm very much encouraged by the cast and by who's running it, Kevin Smith. I think it has potential, at least. At the very least, it has potential.
Yeah. I mean, there have been iterations of He-Man and most recently, I think She-Ra over the years. I don't think any of them have been particularly as successful as the 1980s original series, but there's certainly an audience. I mean, the original series was just, man, it was a massive juggernaut from what I understand back in the 80s. I'm kind of with George. I'm a little after my time, but I remember hearing it, on the school kids' playground, even in the 90s. So it did have a huge impact on pop culture. And I think it's really kind of a fascinating thing. I mean, you have some really heavy hitters, throwing their hat in the ring and contributing to this project to give it some validity. I guess Kevin Smith called in all the favors for this one. It's really, really interesting. But Kevin Smith, like you said, he's a fan. He knows the material, knows the lore, almost like somebody else we just got done talking about. But look, it's coming out of a passionate place, and we'll see if it strikes that balance between what worked before and what works now. But this is I'm excited for this one. I really am.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I had all the toys. You guys ever see the old '80s He-Man toys? They were.
I actually used to own them. So,
weren't they great?
Yeah, I had a little local store. It was called Groovies, and they sold nostalgic type of 70s and 80s toys. Like they sold the He-Man, they sold Thundercats, SWAT Cats. Like they sold all those. I forget some of the others, but yeah, they sold all kinds of toys, and I was always one that I always leaned more towards the villains, not because of what the villains stood for. I just thought that they were more cool looking, So, like anything that I saw that was like completely out there, it's like I had to have it.
Yeah, the toys were amazing. My grandma, man, my grandma was like, she was kind of a nerd herself. like she bought me all of anytime she went to the store and saw a new one, she'd just buy it for me. I had a whole closet full of these, dude. I mean, it was great. I absolutely loved it. Did you ever collect the toys, Vash?
No, I didn't collect the toys. I was all into the Star Wars action figures myself personally. So nice. I never made it over to He-Man. But I mean, look, I had friends who had the toys. I had friends who had who watched the show. Cartoon Network and the Tsunami specials and stuff like that. They would play He-Man and stuff like that. So I remember it. I remember growing up with it. I wasn't super into the show, but there's definitely appeal there. There's no question. This is a really cool thing. It's got a complex kind of lore and world, and it's really kind of a unique kind of programmed show, and it's just I think this could do well in the new era of entertainment, as long as it's done passionately, with heart, with soul. Kevin Smith, I think, is the right guy.
Yeah, and do you know, Vash, do you know who owns He-Man now? Like, because I think it was Filmation back in the day, but obviously I don't think Filmation's even around anymore. I haven't heard of them in years.
No.
Did Netflix buy He-Man, or is it owned by some other studio?
I believe, because I believe the She-Ra show that came out, I think in like 2018 or something like that. I think that premiered on Netflix as well. So that leads me to believe that Netflix might have the distribution rights when it comes to TV entertainment and so forth. So I think that's with them. But let me just look in here and see if I can actually find that.
Yeah, I'm just very curious what studio owns that now, because I'm sure it's passed hands since the 80s, because I don't believe Filmation's even around anymore.
No, I don't think so either. It is a Hasbro property, and Hasbro historically has done work with all kinds of people, but I don't know who actually owns the rights to it. This is very interesting.
Yeah.
I think it is Netflix, though. I think Netflix has it, from what I understand. So I would just say it's with them. Look, if it's successful, Netflix has shelled out big money for stuff like, I don't know, what was that? what was that big franchise? It was the video game franchise. The Witcher.
Oh,
Remember,
okay.
it had like a little series with Henry Cavill and stuff like that.
Right.
For the Witcher franchise. I mean, if this is big enough, good enough, you could see like a theatrical type release at one point, even if it's done in animation. Netflix is doing all kinds of stuff, rewriting the game when it comes to content production, distribution, and so forth. So I don't know, we'll see. But this is quite fascinating.
Netflix is thirsty. They spend billions on content. They're crazy. They don't spare any expense. They just like like we talked about, like, you know, like Discovery, Warner Media, Comcast earlier on in this whole video. But like, man, the opposite of Comcast is Netflix. They have all the ambition in the world, and they'll spend every dime to get there. You know, they don't care. We'll bankrupt the company. Just spend it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's those guys are, man, those guys just, yeah, like you said, money out of the money fire hose. They'll just pour it on to whatever they really believe in and trust, and they'll sink it. It is quite fascinating. You know, but if you want that $200 million subscriber number, this is stuff you kind of have to do.
Right. Exactly. See, now, George, now we got to wait because now the 90s stuff, hopefully we get some reboots and sequels from the 90s stuff that you grew up on, you know?
Yeah, like I'm waiting like for like that slew full of like, take me back to my childhood. Like I want to see, because I mean, I started seeing it like with, I mean, even though it started in the late 80s, but it moved into the 90s, but like how they did with DuckTales,
right,
and how they kind of incorporated in a few episodes of Darkwing Duck and everything. Like I would love to see more of that stuff come back to life, because a lot of those things you mentioned of Darkwing Duck and Tailspin and everything, and kids are like, what's that? You know, like they've never even heard of that stuff unless you actually put it on Disney Plus, and it's like, oh, that's what it is. That's why I started my son off very early, because I used to have the box sets, and I said, you're watching Darkwing Duck, you're watching DuckTales, you're watching Tailspin, you're watching Goof Troops. You know, you're watching this, so you get to know what it is.
See, parents at home, that's how you do it.
That's it.
That's it. Good parenting 101.
That is it. Oh man. Yeah. Hopefully we do get some stuff like that.
I mean, I will definitely say, I mean, I know that this is a sequel. This isn't a reboot, but I'm telling you right now, you know, Rocky and Muggsy, the gangsters from the Looney Tunes that kidnapped Bugs Bunny. I swear, if Martin Scorsese moves on to make his version of it, I'm gone. I'm done.
Oh, Jesus.
It's coming, folks.
No. Yeah, I'm sure. That's gonna go off. That's gonna go off real well. I'm confident in that. No, I mean, hopefully we get some more ideas like this. You know, I know some people are like, oh, reboots and stuff like that, but I think if you do it really well,
yeah,
I think it could be, you know, you could make something out of it. So it'll be interesting to see.